Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited about this topic of skills credentials. But before we get started, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up on Wednesday, November 17th, and it's titled Building a Skilled Team, How Upskilling, Coaching, and Recognition Can Help. It's going to be particularly valuable to employers who are looking for creative ways to attract talent and keep them engaged. Thanks to our partners and today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who joined today's webinar. That would be you. I'm putting a link in the chat right now, and you'll want to take advantage of this one. The regular price for our conference tickets is $149, and this link will give you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. Today, we'll be exploring the topic, judging the relevance of skills credentials. As an employer, understanding and evaluating educational credentials can be a challenge. According to a 2019 report from Credential Engine, there are 700,000 unique credentials in the US. A lack of understanding can result in missed talent and opportunities. In fact, older workers often turn to credentials to help expand and certify their skills. A recent AARP survey reported that 2/3 of older workers have taken some type of skills training in the last 2 years. Yet employers have trouble navigating the credential marketplace and determining which non-degree credentials are quality markers of skills. As more and more companies begin to explore skills-based hiring practices, employers will need to have a deeper understanding of the credential marketplace as a whole and promising practices from other employers on how they're approaching this credential market. During this webinar, you'll have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Roy Swift, Executive Director of WorkCred. WorkCred is a nonprofit organization that's focused on strengthening workforce quality by improving the credentialing system, and as well as ensuring its ongoing relevance and preparing employers, workers, educators, and governments to use it effectively. And you'll be hearing from Dr. Amy Dufresne, CEO of the HR Certification Institute. HRCI is the premier credentialing organization for the human resource profession, setting the standard for HR rigor, excellence, and expertise for more than 45 years. Our sponsor today is AARP. I'll tell you a bit about them. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence and nearly 38 million members, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most to families: health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. AARP also produces the nation's largest circulation publications, AARP the Magazine and AARP Bulletin. Now, a few quick logistical items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM, and from HR Certification Institute, HRCI. And look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromdayone.co. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, the Senior Advisor for Financial Resilience at AARP, Heather Tinsley-Fix. Okay, Heather, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started with the presentation. And okay. So today we're going to cover the current state of the credentialing landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between credential types. And we're going to talk about the impact of credentials on older workers. And most importantly, probably for our audience, we're going to talk about how you can identify quality credentials and provide some recommendations and best practices. Before I get into that, I wanted to share some research that AARP has recently done. We've been very interested in the topic of skills-based hiring because we know that skills are the most important aspect for finding the right person for the right job, but they're also very difficult to verify. The application process and the interview process and talent acquisition has many areas where bias can creep in. One of those biases could be ageism. And so we're interested in how we can combat that by focusing on skills versus and skills and experience versus age or culture fit or things like that. So we fielded some research, actually just the last couple of months, with employers to see what kind of barriers they had towards adopting skills-based hiring, and also what their sort of temperature was around using credentials as proof of skills. I'm just going to go over some very high-level findings because the really great stuff is coming with Roy and Amy. Just briefly here, we found that many employers do hire workers who lack the quote-unquote required degrees, but few do it often. So only 12% do it frequently. Additionally, the majority of respondents said that they do prioritize skills over education, but the importance of education is largely the same. And what this says to me is that education remains just as important as it used to be, and the importance of skills has risen, but it hasn't risen over or been privileged over education. Just reading between the lines, one of the things I think, and I would love to hear from you all in the audience, is that it's really difficult to switch from a cultural mindset that has been so accustomed to viewing education as a proxy for skills and for intelligence and for acumen. And so while skills-based hiring and acknowledging that skills are important, in some cases more important than particular education, it's still difficult to sort of pull away from that old way of thinking. Additionally, when evaluating skills, experience actually trumps credentials in importance. And I know that Roy is going to be covering this and Amy as well, but it's easier to take a look at a person's experience on their resume versus a set of credentials if you don't know what those credentials mean. Lastly, in terms of barriers, around 4 in 10 employers cite barriers to accepting credentials. Things like infrastructure and technology related to searching for candidates with credentials. This could be, a platform issue, an ATS issue. Also difficulty in determining the validity of a credential, the lack of transparency about how long did it take to complete this credential, what was the subject matter, was there an evaluation, and also things like the existing hiring processes don't include credentials in evaluating candidates. So you can see here a number of different barriers that employers face when leveraging credentials as a proof of someone's skills. I'd like to turn it back over to Steve, who's going to introduce Roy. And after Roy and Amy finish their presentations, I'm going to be moderating a chat between them. So I'm really looking forward to that. Steve?
Sure. Hi, I'd like to introduce Roy Swift. He is Director of WorkCred, who's going to give you a brief presentation before turning it over to Amy. Thanks again.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I appreciate the introduction. Next slide. Steve actually quoted our mission statement earlier, but the vision may be the most important thing and the most crucial and probably the most difficult job we have facing us in the workforce community. A labor market which relies on the relevance, which is probably an issue, as upkeep, quality, and value of workforce credentials for opportunities, growth, and development. And even though you saw industries saying that they want to rely on skill-based hiring, then we aren't there yet, and we might not get there based on some anecdotal data that I see. And what I want to say about this slide is that there may be 3 things that are major barriers for us. Transparency of credentials, what's in them, because it is a false dichotomy to say skills versus credential. Credentials have skills in them. We just can't see them a lot of times in this regard. And so this is a major issue. So transparency, ongoing systematic communication. How many years now have we said we need better communication between higher education, the non-degree credential world, and industry? For about 5 or 6 years, and nothing is happening. I mean, I shouldn't say nothing. I'm sure in pockets there are having, but we're not doing very well in that because it keeps coming up as one of the barriers. And we need a system that's dynamic and responsive to change. And even in the certification community, you'll hear me say, I think the certification community could do a better job. Higher education is always the one that gets the bad rap for this, but I think other areas of credentials too. Next. Okay, here's your credentialing system, and it's no wonder people are confused about what it is, but all of these boxes have something to do. Federal government, things like the FDA, the OSHA, the EPA, the Environmental Protection and Radon credentialing, Department of Energy in building installation, OSHA in construction, FDA in the food industry, they all affect the block over here in the purple, the professional trade. And look where the power is for credentials in this system. It's not in the higher education world, although that certainly, and by the way, the size of these blocks don't have a significance as such, because no one knows exactly how boxes should be sized in this messy system. But look at the functions that the professional societies do, and professional societies are many times not at the table with higher education and industry when they should be. And so that's a major problem, in that we are not bringing all of the stakeholders together that we should be in this. Also, whoever has the best lobbyist is going to get the best licensure description of their profession. Because it's legislators who decide the scope of practice for licensing. And I'll talk about the difference between licensing certificate and certification in just a minute. So we have the state licensing system, we have the federal government influencing, we have the private sector, and then we have higher education, which many times controls what higher education, the professional societies control what higher education teaches, the programmatic academic accreditors, who determine what happens in the School of Business, the School of Health Professions, the School of Engineering in this regard. So there are many, many players that determine, and the reason it's important to understand this system is to understand whether a credential has legitimacy in regard to who is involved in it for the validity of that credential. Next. Yes, and Steve mentioned this too, Credential Engine, and frankly, it's an inexact science. It's so messy. Who knows what the real number really is in this regard, but it's approaching nearly 1 million credentials in the US, and the more credentials we have, the more names we have, like micro credentials and micro badges and super badges and many certificates and this sort of thing, and I'll mention that. So it's a wild, wild west world that is very difficult, and there's no real one database. Certainly Credential Engine is one that's trying to bring transparency and the collection of credentials in this regard because of this enormous navigation problem. Next. And so we are in terminology chaos. Everybody's talking about credentials, but they may be talking about a different credential to the other person using the same word. And so one of the things that I want to clarify, when somebody says they have a credential, then you have to peel the onion one more time and say, what kind of credential do you have? Do you have a certificate? Do you have a badge? Do you have a degree? Do you have a certification? Do you have a license? Otherwise, we have no idea what we're talking about and how it affects the employers. Next. And so I just took 4 of the credentials because the rest of them are so hard to define. But one of the biggest problems today is that certificate and certification is used interchangeably. So you don't know if they're really obtaining a certification. A certificate is an educational credential. It has education and training and may or may not have an assessment, because we have like certificate of participation, certificate of completion, certificate of achievement, assessment-based certificate, assessment-based certificate that's accredited, and you have to have a criterion reference examination. So even if somebody says they have a certificate, you have to ask more questions in regard, what kind of certificate do you have? To have any confidence in what is going on. Certification is not an educational credential. That's why it's not considered in the higher education rubrics, and it's not considered in the funding that many times the higher education group, which is a major problem because certification doesn't have a home in the federal government, which is one of the things that WorkCred wants to try to work on. It's not a home in education because of the higher education. It's not at the labor. That's mainly about apprentices, and the commerce doesn't exactly latch on to this. And I'm going to talk a lot more about certifications. And then a license is a legal kind of credential. It's produced by a government, whether at the federal level, at the FAA, or at the state licensure, which you mainly are mostly familiar with. Next. And recently, WorkCred did a study on the older worker, 50 plus years, and looked at what is happening like at the one-stops and what kind of certificates. And next slide, I'm going to just briefly, because of time, just tell you the kind of the bottom line, that more research is needed on the value of earning new credentials for older workers. Analysts shows displaced older workers benefit from new credentials, particularly non-degree. Why? Because they're fast. They don't have to go back and spend a year or two or even 6 months. Sometimes with their their experience skills, they will be able to bridge to maybe a certification or a certificate that may be important. More research is needed to better understand how new credentials can support these. We have very little research in this area and is desperately needed. Stakeholders must share data to better understand. We have very little data because the data is all about higher education, frankly. That's where the big databases are, and not in the non-degree world. We need much more of that. And then more research is needed to understand how WIA programs can better serve older workers. I was actually shocked, and I'm running short on time here. So, but I just wanted to read a list of things that people were getting in the WIA programs. Computer occupations, which naturally you would say that for upskilling and reskilling, that's where a lot of people go. But listen to this, health technologists and technicians, home health aides and nursing assistants, other office and administrative workers, metal and plastic workers, healthcare support occupation, financial clerks. I actually think we can do better for the older adult. And those are, and maybe it's because of the socioeconomic level and the post-secondary level of people. But to me, we are not doing a good service to that population. We can do better on higher types of credentials that may only require a high school education, but have higher salaries in this regard. Next. And the word certification we talked about earlier, and it is used, sometimes it may be a training program and they call it a certification. We have sort of degrees of rigor of certifications. Sometimes somebody will say they have a certification and they took a standardized exam, which is fine, but we don't think that's a full-blown certification. Next, they might have a standardized exam and a recertification, or they might have standardized exam, recertification, and the ability to revoke it, which we think are the three major components of a certification program. And we think the ultimate is a third-party attesting to the quality of that. And I know HRCI believes this also. Amy will be talking next. And so how do you look at a quality certification? And it's about proper documentation in anything in credentials. Certifications are either embedded in membership organizations, but they have to be firewalled away from membership in order to establish that they are third-party independent judgment that competency had been achieved. Unfortunately, a lot of certification bodies violate that rule, which is not good because then membership controls it versus being a neutral third party. Probably Amy can appreciate that too. A specific scope that relates to the current job roles. Does the scope really, when you see job descriptions, does it really relate to the scope? Policies, procedures to ensure equity so that everything is implemented in an equal way with objectivity, not people making judgments without following objective criteria. Prerequisites based on data instead of trying to keep people out by saying, oh, this requires a bachelor's degree. Well, does it really require a bachelor's degree? What does the data say about the knowledge and skills that would require a bachelor's degree? Too often that is violated. A code of conduct and ethics, if that happens to be the case where it's needed, and due process procedures for revocation. Nobody wants to have their surveys taken away without due process. Next. And then job task analysis. You hear this a lot, but there's a lot of violation in people doing job task analysis. Some just do a very simple, some are more thing. Generally, we, in the certification community, it involves a validation survey. In other words, it won't take the 15 people, experts in the room's opinion. It goes out to maybe thousands of people to validate whether those are the skills that are needed for the particular job. And then that survey is translated very specifically into the test blueprint. Next. And then the exams are written very precisely. You can't just call up somebody and say, oh, can you write a test item for me for our exam? No, it's done specifically according to the task statement. So it's measuring what it's supposed to measure. If it's a performance exam, there has to be detailed rubrics to ensure objectivity. Generally, more than one evaluator is important to have, and if it's done in many different locations, we have to establish inter-rate reliability. So that what happens in Chicago is the same as what happens in New York or in Los Angeles. That's great. And a cut score that is sure that we are passing the people we should pass and failing the people we should fail. Next. Other signs of quality, number of certifications in the database. If they have 200,000 or 300,000, there must be something good about it, that people want it and need it. It has a recertification program. The percent of people who recertify, there are a lot of people who get it, but then it got them the job, but they don't recertify because they don't think that credential helps them move up the chain in their particular employment. And then required or preferred in job postings, accepted by state licensure. If the certification, and we don't have time to go into it today, or maybe we'll get into the discussion, but state licensure and certifications are sometimes connected. State licensure sometimes accepts the national certification exams for licensure purposes. The longevity, they've been in business for 50 or 60 years, and the transparency. Next. And I just refer to go to our website. We did one about recommendations for looking at quality with the National Governors Association. And it's a fairly robust document that I think you might find helpful. Heather, I hope I was able to accomplish in the time I'm supposed to be accomplishing it here.
Thank you, Roy. That was a whistle-stop tour through the complicated landscape of credentials and certificates and degrees and licenses. I admit I did not know the degree to which the federal government and state governments are actually involved in sort of validating or controlling the definition of some of these things. So that's really interesting. I'd like to turn it over to Amy now to talk through her slides, and then we're gonna have a sort of a general discussion. I have questions already forming in my mind for both of you. So Amy, take it away.
Super, thanks, Heather. So Roy, really fascinating when you talked about this chasm between higher education and business. More than 2 decades ago, that's what my dissertation was on. So I can tell you that we've made like very little progress here. That chasm still exists between how those two entities can work together to prepare our students of the future, right? So we've made little progress. On the next, you can advance 2 slides. You can skip over that. This is a very large number, $34 billion. You see that number and you go, gulp, what does that mean? 1 in 3 jobs are going to be disrupted because of the technology changes that we're seeing, according to the research from PwC that was put out within the past couple of years. The World Economic Forum estimates that upskilling the 1.37 million US workers who are threatened by these changes, the changes of technology, AI, the way that we're working, will cost us $34 billion. And when you think about this is just in the US, this is not globally. You look at the world and you can multiply that by probably 100. That's a large number when you think about the upskilling that needs to happen. And on the next slide are a few of the CEOs who have said, we really need to take charge of leading this upskilling effort. And there was some research done by Bain that was published in HBR, very interesting research, very interesting study, that 60% of a company's future roles can be filled by employees that are there right now. So think about that. When you think about, instead of going out and recruiting, retaining, realigning, or sunsetting individuals that you may have that have been with your organization for many, many years, you can upskill them and reskill them in ways to make them more efficient and effective for these technology changes that are happening. In 2017, McKinsey did some research. 375 million workers, or 14% of our global workforce, will have to switch occupations or acquire new skills by 2030 because of the automation and artificial intelligence that we're seeing. 87% of executives said that they were experiencing skills gaps in the workforce, and they were expecting them in the next couple of years. But less than half of them had any sense of how they were going to address that skills gap between what they have now and what they were looking to do. In 2019, so this study was done pre-pandemic, super interesting research, that 46% of CEOs were in favor of upskilling their workforce. They said, we've got to do this. But 12 months later, only 18% had made any progress. And 1 in 10 of the largest companies on the survey that was done on a global capacity, said they have made no progress at all. So this is, an area that's been really a huge need and a huge focus, that we need people, we need competent people, we need more talent to help us to move our businesses forward. And I've highlighted a couple of CEOs here who have really taken the lead on this. I sit on the Wall Street Journal CEO Council with Mike Petter. So I had the opportunity to hear him talk about upskilling he's the largest military shipbuilder, actually here in Virginia. I'm located in Virginia, so he is actually in Norfolk. And he has a huge skills gap and is going into preschools to find future shipbuilders, welders, engineers. He's going in and working and coaching with kids. It just so happens that his wife happens to be a preschool teacher. So that makes the barrier of entry pretty low for him to go in and do this. But he said, I'm doing it right now because I can't find people. That skills gap continues to exist. On the next slide, I just like to highlight some of those recommendations for the C-suite in upskilling and looking at sort of how do you prepare people for the future. And I think one of the things that organizations have been lacking, and before I became the CEO for HRCI, I've spent a lot of years in HR, and so that data analytics, that people analytics has been something that over the last 30 years has gained momentum, and CEOs are digging in more to the people analytics, looking at what are some of the skills that I have right now that I didn't even know that I had, or that I need to meet the strategic focus of the company moving forward. So there's, that those analytics are key for employers to be looking at to identify what are those skills that I need. I think business leaders have to be very clear what it is they're looking for. What does that strategy look like? What does the narrative look like, both internally and externally? And we've got to have a new approach to workplace management. So Roy talked a lot about the differences between all of these different programmatic certificates, certifications, micro-credentials. There's all sorts of elements under sort of this upskilling umbrella. There's also company training that can happen as well. But frequently, and we know this because there's been a multitude of studies on this, that individuals who work for companies want to go outside of their companies for upskilling, reskilling, training. They don't want to stay inside of the organization. Even though organizations build up their learning and development functions, they invest a lot of money in this. They're finding that it's not worth the money that they're investing in it, because they want to send them to people. Remember the spaghetti and meatballs diagram, as I'm calling it, that Roy showed us, with the federal government and the credentialing bodies and all these different meatballs that were out there. All those places are offering great opportunities for individuals to upskill themselves. But in some cases, people don't know, where do I go? What do I need in order to reskill and upskill themselves? And that's where the C-suite comes in to try to help people to identify what those skills and capabilities are. On the next slide, I'm just going to do a deep dive into HRCI. So as I mentioned, I've been leading HRCI for about a decade, and we've been around for 45 years. We have certified more than 500,000 people. We're in 125 countries. And we've done a lot of research because we've been around for so long. We've been able to do longitudinal studies to look at individuals that are certified and the impact that they have on the employment. So the first research that we did is to look at how is our certification match up with other certifications that are out there in the HR training, learning, benefit space. And our certifications are requested 5 times more than any other certification that's out there. We have a suite of certifications from somebody who's looking to break into HR all the way up to the strategic CHRO level. So we have the whole gamut, and we have some specific credentials for individuals that are practicing HR in specific areas around the world. Over the past 24 months, we've expanded our learning opportunities for individuals to, we have a virtual learning platform, and part of being certified, being a certification program, is that you've got to have some sort of a demonstration of continued competence. For us, that means every 3 years you need to get recertified, and you do that by participating in work activities that are new to you, participating in conferences, doing extra learning. So there's all sorts of ways that you can get recertification activities. So, so we provide sort of the full suite. And at the very bottom of this slide, there are logos from organizations that are accrediting our program. We are the only certification program that follows the ISO 17024 accreditation. We follow, our entire program is accredited, which gives us the opportunity to work with individual organizations like the US Army, who uses our certification as a marker to prepare veterans or soon-to-be veterans for employment outside of the US Army. So we're preparing them to get jobs, because one of the top 10 MOS codes with the highest unemployment rate was HR, because the language was different, the tasks were the same. So what we were able to do is to develop learning and training programs for individuals in the Army to have a lexicon so that they were able to make that transition. Certification is a great bridge to do that. So a marker of that, federal government looks to see, are these programs accredited? Ours are, there we go. And we follow those very rigorous standards that are put forth. ANSI is also one of the credentialing bodies that credentials organizations, and those are really the major organizations within the US. And anyone who says that they have their accreditation program accredited, you want to make sure that it follows that 17024 accreditation, because there are very rigorous standards that a program puts in place. Organizations don't give away the certification. There are certain, they're using subject matter experts to help to develop those certifications, and that individuals who are taking those certifications know that these are sort of what is the basis for what an individual practicing that profession needs to know, in our case, HR. So this is a little bit about HRCI. And on the next slide, I mentioned this earlier in that we have done several longitudinal studies. We've commissioned them by an outside person. It's not us that are doing these studies. But we wanted to be able to tell people who are getting certified and tell employers, why get certified? Why does this matter? Why is this important? And what we found in our research, and we've done this research for more than 15 years, actually more than that, looking at the benefits of HRCI certification, is that employers are asking for it more than any other certification out there. That's not, that's a research more of looking to see what jobs are asking for certifications. We also know that individuals that hold our certifications are better performers in their jobs according to their supervisors. They have higher income growth based on somebody who isn't certified. Their promotion opportunities are more than somebody who isn't certified. So they're climbing up that ladder in a much faster way, because employers are seeing this as a marker of excellence. And because we've been around for 45 years, people see that and go, I understand that somebody who's certified by HRCI knows what good HR looks like. And I think one of the things that we also, on the next slide, I just wanted to hum one bar about, is that we're leading at HRCI the ISO HRM standards process. We have been appointed by ISO and ANSI to do this, which means that we're working to make sure that best practices are spread across the world, and we're facilitating this. I was telling the group, I was up at 5 a.m. this morning talking to folks from China, from Europe, and from the US about how do we improve on ESG. So somewhat related to the HR space. So this is, if you want to learn more about HRCI, here's our website. We happen to have a free webinar on Thursday. We'd love to have you. It'll be lots of credits if you're certified by us, or if you're looking to learn more about HR, you can come and visit us on our website. So, so thank you, Heather. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Amy. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can have some conversation, and also we have some questions in the chat that I'll be putting to you. So, Amy, you had talked about how folks who get HR certifications through HRCI are shown to be able to advance up the ladder, and that makes me think of the equity question, because I think a lot of the interest in skills-based hiring is to help address inequities and to open pathways of opportunity for previously disadvantaged groups, or groups that have been experienced barriers due to prejudice. So how, and yet we're talking about this landscape that is so littered. What is your sort of sense of how we can move forward with skills-based hiring, and what employers can do to try and be really mindful of how this is has sort of a social justice component?
Right. Wow, that's a big question with a lot of different elements to it.
Yeah.
I think that from one perspective, I look at credentialing, at a certification as being much more, someone can reach it much simpler without making a significant investment in a higher education degree, which is averaging right now about $30,000 a year for 1 year. That doesn't matter if it's public or private, which is pretty significant. And students are recognizing, I don't want to walk out the door and be in debt. I want to be able to contribute, and so we're seeing this shift happen. And I think what HR, fortunately, I think HR leaders who are certified by us understand that certification in some cases can replace somebody getting a degree, and that you don't have to have a degree in order to have certain jobs. There are many people that have been successful without them. And I think that the barriers for entry, we need to lower those to give people the chance to show what they have to give, and to, as I mentioned before, that 60% of the people that we have right now are going to be our future workers. So, but we need to continue. I mean, right now we've got a serious issue with women in the workplace who have been hit very hard because of the pandemic. Many of whom are still at home caring for children, fearful for them to be in a space where their kids might get sick. So we're going backwards when you look at the demographics. I was just on a panel with the chief economist for ADP, and we were talking about this very issue. And when you talk about equity, Heather, about how we've gone backwards in the case where we've made some huge progress, and we've got to get a leg up on this and really help to get some of these folks back to work. And I think that credentialing is one way to do it, to give people a path forward, instead of saying, I was barely breaking even with what I was making every week, and I was, not getting anywhere, and people are sitting out because they are trying to figure out how to get ahead. So now I think is an amazing time for people to look at credentialing as a way to differentiate themselves and to get them back into the workplace. And I mean, frankly, they should come to HRCI because we have an entry-level HR certification, and the BLS is saying that HR is a growing profession. Between now, we're going to see a double-digit growth between now and 2030. So people should look at HR as a way to get in a professional job with some, future growth.
One of the other problems, Heather, is that companies many times don't really know what they need. And they haven't done their homework on their side, and then it makes it more difficult, even if they have done their homework, then to have the transparency of the credential to see where the match can occur for this shorter pathway of non-degree credentials. And then the third factor is that, and I don't blame HR, because who knows who's doing the hiring at times. They may hire for something else that they didn't advertise for. And it often has to do with the personality, the interpersonal relations. And there was a person who was involved in the Stanford task force that I was involved in just recently. And her research supported that the job description and the job position that's advertised, they hired somebody different based on the interviews that they did with people. So that's a major problem too. We've got to get that all together because it's not fair to a lot of people who might have the skills that never made it to the interview particular phase.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like job descriptions are a big part of it. Really paying attention to your sourcing function so that you have the most diverse pipeline you can get. But also, pushing vendors of these applicant tracking systems and talent management systems to embed credentials more into just the flow. In addition to the culture change, right? So pushing on your hiring managers and on your leadership. Roy, going to some of what you covered. you gave recommendations for what is a sign of a quality credential, but how can an employer note or figure out those things based on you cited a lack of transparency. So for example, how can you dig into a credential to know whether or not there is this job analysis being done, there is a rigor in terms of the testing and the accreditation?
Most of the time, the good ones will have it on their website. They will have the test blueprint. They will have the job analysis study. But that is one in which if the employer starts demanding that these 5 things, whatever they would do, and based on the things that I was talking about, then the credential community will become bored because they're interested in selling their credential in this regard. Now, getting into the nitty-gritty may not be possible, but it also the things that I said at the end are pretty visible about how many people have been certified, and then the recertification and whether it's connected. Also, the whole business is the certification, I didn't mention this, but is the certification a dead end street, or is it connected to a pathway? Many of the certifications now are creating and stacking their certifications and coming up with a lower level entry into the industry. And I can give you a very specific example, like the behavioral analyst, which mental health, is one of the biggie things in this country today. And they created a behavioral analyst technician. And that is just a person who's been working in the mental health field under a supervised, certified behavioral analyst, but allows them to have their knowledge and skills recognized by a certification, and then sets them up into the pathway of an associate behavioral analyst, a behavioral analyst, a doctoral thing. And actually the other big topic, supply chain, they are doing the same thing in logistics and the supply chain manager position. And so looking for the sequence so that it's not a dead end street either, because that's the criticism sometimes of these non-degree credentials out there, is that you get the credential and then there's nowhere to go with it, in this grade. And so that's the other element that I would talk about.
Thank you so much. I have one more question before I get to the ones in the chat. And that is that the World Economic Forum's Future Jobs 2020 report, which was published in October of last year, listed 15 top skills for 2025. And what really struck me when I looked at this list was that there was not a technical skill until item number 7 on the list. And the majority of the skills in this list were what we call soft skills, right? So things like persuasion, critical thinking, problem solving, resilience, adaptability, that kind of stuff, self-regulation. All of those skills are soft skills that take time to develop, that tend to develop with experience on the job. And so older workers tend to have them in larger amounts. Not exclusively, but they tend to have more of those things: professionalism, work ethic, etc. Do you have any advice for employers looking for how to certify or validate those type of skills in a resume application process, right? Because I don't know that we really have certificates in, adaptability or resiliency, or maybe they're starting to happen. And so I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll start, and I'm sure Amy has a lot to say too about this. I'll be brief. First of all, our educational system is failing us in this regard. We're trying to dump information onto people, and that is only half the story. What we need are even the non-degree ones. There are people who are criticizing certifications now, is that they do not incorporate the soft skills into the technical content. And so they're only giving the 50% of the person that employers really want in this regard. And so if you go to a university and all you're done is lectured to Are you developing critical thinking or teamwork? And we are stuck in the most efficient way to pass on information, and that isn't what we need in this country. We need a more robust preparation of people that actually looks at the total work skills. So being a little controversial here, but I think it's important at this point. Amy.
Yeah, so I think, I think that the critical thinking skills are key. I would say they're, for me as a CEO, number one. The biggest differentiator for any company is its people. Because when you get down to it, we have products, but really our people make us different. Our people bring to life what it is that we are producing, preparing, selling. So all that really, it's our people. And so for me, it's about critical thinking. And we have embedded this into our certification program. So we are not regurgitation of information. We are asking questions, and you need to think. I think that's where, in the preparation of the programs, which we do not do, we have partners that do that. They're all talking about how you need to be thinking about this. Use your brain. This is not a regurgitation of something that you've read. Use it and critically think about it, because it is a skill that we're asking people to utilize, to have, and to apply in our organization. So I think, it's a challenge to have a certification program that's, okay, what's critical thinking? What does that mean? What is, I think that's a little, it is softer and it's more mushy, but certification programs need to embed that into their programs. And as part of the recertification, for example, one of our requirements is that every 3 years, an HR person has to take some kind of a related course in ethics, which is, can you teach ethics? Can you, I think it's sort of, we're seeing a lot of that, play out in front of us on news programs, et cetera, every day. So it's, sort of that, that keeping it top of mind. The CPAs that they have as part of their recertification credit, they've got to take one ethics requirement. I think theirs is every year, actually, and not every 3 years. So I think we're all seeing this as embedded into our programs.
I think the other important thing about soft skills is that it has to be contextualized in the technical content. People are wasting their money going to these courses and saying they're going to teach you the employability skills. It's different. And I say that you have to look at profiles. Every occupation or industry has a different profile for soft and employability skills. In some, hey, communication skills are at the top. Critical thinking, maybe not so, but in some cases like laboratory science, critical thinking and analysis is important. Communication skills can be low. So we need to talk about profiles that are associated with context of particular credentials.
All right, well, that leads us actually into some of our questions that are here. We've got 10 questions, and I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of them, but the first one I want to ask is, where does experience in a particular field come in, or does it under the credential umbrella, even if there is no certificate or license? And I think this kind of goes back to one of the slides I showed at the very beginning, that experience trumps certification in the minds of employers that we surveyed. I guess really where it comes in is on your resume, the list of things that you've done. But I don't know if you have just quickly any thoughts on that.
Well, experience as such probably wouldn't meet the definition of credential as such, but it's equally important. In our study with the manufacturer extension partnerships, the small and medium manufacturer in this country, experience was the biggest thing they hire for, because they can't find a credential that matches what they need. In their case, it's probably micro credentials in a multitasker, because the small guy doesn't need the specialized. He needs somebody that knows a little bit about everything in this regard. But experience needs to be translated into competencies so that the employer understands what that experience is. Job descriptions don't get it a lot of times because they're not specific enough. Translating those jobs into competencies, and that's where it's probably another time, and I'd love to hear Amy's thoughts about this, about the learning and experience records, the LERs, that everybody is saying is the next in the cloud resume, which is designed to try to quantify experience into some type of credential as such. I don't know, Amy may have some thoughts about that.
Well, Amy, and can you also, when you answer that, can you also talk about the pace of the proliferation of new credentials with technological advances?
Oh, wow. All right, so both of those things. So we're seeing, I mean, I don't know if this is completely, kind of your point, Roy, but I sit on I'm in a part of an advisory board for an organization that's working on blockchain in validating credentials. So it's validating college, your work experience, your salary. So you sort of have this electronic file on yourself and you push that out to employers. So you've got to get colleges and universities bought in, credentialing organizations bought in. So there's all different, you're kind of this, I guess you have your own little cloud in space that has has all of your stuff about you that you push out. And I think we're making progress, but it is certainly, as Jim Collins would call it, a BHAG, right? I mean, this is, to get all of these organizations cooperating together is pretty significant, and to share some of this, highly confidential information about people where, there's all sorts of privacy requirements. We've seen China's privacy requirements are even amping things up more. So we're really, I think it's a challenge, but I think we're moving there, but not at record pace. And so Heather, what was what was the second part of that question?
The pace of technology. It sounds like the credentialing space is not able to keep up probably as quickly as we'd like them to.
Well, I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot of development in the credentialing space, particularly over the last 24 months. I mean, some of the ANSI was on the forefront of this, but other credentialing or certification bodies or accreditation bodies were very reluctant to allow individuals to take exams in homes. Well, these testing centers are closed or, operating at half a capacity. And so, people need to get certified. There were credentialing organizations that got priority over people like HRCI, phlebotomists, other, critical functions. They were trying to get people to hold the credentials to get in these critical jobs in the health space where we needed them. So we've seen this amplification of technology in AI-driven items. We're seeing, I think I've seen some organizations that have dabbled in this. I'm seeing a lot more investment. There's a lot of money coming into organizations. VCs are putting a lot of money in here. So I think we're going to see this rapidly move forward over the next 5 years. I think we're going to see certification programs be able to push out programs in a much more rapid pace and still keep the validity and the focus on what's important to make sure that you're keeping true to what profession it is you're supporting.
The 5-year space for job analysis is a dinosaur.
Right, right. That's
ongoing, systematic. And I know you're
out
of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. I want to say thank you to both of you, and let Steve wrap us up.
Thanks to you, Heather, Amy, and Roy. It was a great conversation. Lots of questions from the audience. Thanks again to our sponsor, AARP, and to all of you for participating today. I want to quickly mention one of our upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. Next Tuesday, November 2nd, we'll be hosting How to Manage the Perils and Promise of the New Hybrid Workplace, hosted in partnership with McKinsey & Company. As companies develop their plans for the transformation of the workplace, they'll need to mitigate risks as well as seize opportunities. Bill Shaninger, a senior partner at McKinsey & Company who advises leaders on large-scale organizational and cultural change, will illuminate ways that business leaders can navigate this new terrain, interviewed by Brian Walsh, the future correspondent for Axios. Thanks, everyone, and stay well.